I'm Emily, 32, and I was just the sister, never the spotlight. All I wanted that day was to quietly drop off a gift and see her smile. But no one saw me as part of the celebration, not even for a moment. They told me to wait outside so I wouldn't ruin the pictures, but someone inside noticed, and everything shifted. The last Saturday of May had that kind of brightness you only get at the start of summer, warm light, soaking through tree leaves, birds chirping like nothing in the world could go wrong. But I was parked 2 blocks away from the venue, staring at my hands on the steering wheel, unsure whether I should walk in. Claire's wedding. My older sister, the one who got everything right in our mother's eyes. I wasn't invited officially. At least not like the others. The envelope I received 2 months ago didn't have an RSVP card, just the program and a sticky note that said, "If you're around, feel free to come by." No address, no +1. I had to Google the venue. Mom hadn't called. Claire hadn't called. No one had followed up. But I came. Not because I thought they'd changed, but because I didn't want to give them the satisfaction of thinking I wouldn't show. I even brought a gift. It sat in the passenger seat beside me, a small square box wrapped in deep blue silk ribbon. Inside was something personal, meaningful. I'd spent weeks making it, but now sitting there I wondered if it was a mistake. They wouldn't care. Probably wouldn't even look at it. I stepped out anyway. As I walked up the hill toward the garden venue, the sounds of string music grew louder. People milled about near the trellis gate, holding champagne flutes and tiny plates of appetizers. Everyone was dressed in cream blush, soft pastels. I wore navy. No one had told me there was a color scheme. Aunt Marianne spotted me first. She gave a quick smile, too quick, and glanced to her left before walking away without saying a word. Then I saw Mom. She was near the check-in table, speaking with one of Claire's college friends. Her eyes landed on me for a second. Just 1 second. Then she looked past me and waved enthusiastically at someone else. A volunteer came up with a clipboard. "Hi, are you with the wedding party?" I hesitated. "I'm Claire's sister." "Oh." She flipped the sheet. "You're not on the seating chart, but you can wait over there near the side path. We'll see if there's room once the ceremony starts." She pointed to a bench near a hedge. The sun didn't reach there. It looked like a waiting area for deliveries. I nodded. "Thank you." I walked over and sat clutching the gift box in my lap. It felt heavier now. Guests streamed past me, all smiling, greeting each other loudly, laughing. A few looked at me like they weren't sure who I was, maybe a +1 or staff. I kept my gaze on a small water fountain across the path. The gentle splash of water was the only sound that didn't make me feel like an outsider. Time passed slowly. Then, faster. A bell rang. Someone called out, "Please take your seats." Chairs filled up. The music swelled. From my bench, I could see the edge of the aisle, the white floral arch, and a blur of bridesmaids gathering at the start. Claire appeared in the distance, radiant, of course, on Dad's arm. She passed right in front of me. Her eyes didn't meet mine. She was smiling wide. I don't think she saw me. Or maybe she did, and chose not to stop. My fingers tightened around the box. The silk ribbon left faint marks on my palm. I sat still, spine straight, trying to ignore the growing knot in my chest. No one came to ask if I wanted a seat. No one noticed I hadn't moved. They were halfway through the ceremony when I finally looked down at the gift again. It didn't belong here, but I stayed. Not for them, for myself. I stayed because leaving would have meant they won. A child nearby spilled something and cried out. A father rushed to comfort him. I watched that moment not with envy, just a quiet ache I didn't expect. The vows began. Claire's voice trembled slightly, but only from emotion. She sounded like the perfect bride, the kind who never made mistakes, at least not in public. My eyes stayed fixed on the arch, even though I couldn't see her face anymore. Then I heard my name, not loud, not from Claire, but from Derek. And just for a moment. At first I thought I imagined it. But there it was again, softer this time, Derek's voice mid-vow catching ever so slightly as he glanced sideways. His eyes flicked past the crowd scanning. Then they stopped. Right on me. We held eye contact for less than a second. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. but something changed in his expression, just a flicker, like recognition or guilt. I looked down instantly, the gift still sitting unopened in my lap. The ribbon had frayed slightly at one end from how tightly I'd been holding it. No one else noticed. Or if they did, they didn't care. Claire continued her vows flawlessly with the kind of grace that made people lean in and smile wistfully. She talked about partnership dreams, building a life together. Her voice floated like it had never known conflict. I wondered what Derek was thinking. If the way his brow furrowed just slightly meant anything. The officiant stepped forward asking them to exchange rings. Applause came early from the front rows where Mom and the aunts sat in full makeup, nodding like they'd trained for this moment since Claire was born. I remained seated on that cold metal bench tucked in the shade like a misplaced coat. I could hear laughter again now, laughter from the guests. Not cruel this time, just distant, delighted, disconnected from my world entirely. The ceremony ended. Music played again, something classical and expected. People stood hugged, lined up for pictures. I stayed put. I waited, because I knew the next part was coming, the reception, and that's where I'd planned to give my gift. It wasn't meant to be grand. No spotlight, just something honest, something she once asked me for years ago, back when we were kids, before the space between us had a name. As guests slowly made their way to the adjoining garden hall, I followed quietly behind. No one stopped me. Maybe they assumed I belonged. Maybe they didn't see me at all. Inside the room glowed with golden light and white linens. Everything looked curated like it had been plucked from a wedding magazine. I saw Claire at the head table, already surrounded by bridesmaids clinking glasses. She looked happy, radiant, and I looked like a guest who wandered in late. I scanned for Mom. She stood near the dessert table, laughing with an old neighbor. Her glance slid over me again. Still nothing. I stepped toward the gift table, careful not to draw attention. It sat near the entrance, stacked with wrapped boxes and large envelopes, cards in metallic ink bows in ivory and peach. My gift didn't match any of them. It was smaller, simpler. I placed it quietly at the edge, not in the center, just beside a larger box half hidden. Then I turned to leave. Emily. It was her voice, Claire. I turned slowly, unsure if I should smile. "Hi," I said. She looked surprised, not warm, not cold, just mildly taken aback, like she'd expected me not to come after all. "You came? Of course." She nodded once, lips tight. "Mom said you might." I waited, letting the silence fill itself. "Then you didn't have to bring anything." "I know," I said, "but I wanted to." Her eyes dropped briefly to the gift table, then returned to mine. Okay, that was it. No hug, no small talk. She turned to greet someone else. I stepped back, letting the wave of her attention pass over me. Someone bumped into me from behind another guest reaching for champagne. They apologized absently. I moved to the far end of the room near the exit doors that led back out to the garden. From there I watched as people danced, toasted filled plates with chicken marsala and spring greens. I didn't eat, didn't drink, just stood unseen as I had been for years. Then, just as I was about to slip out quietly, Derek reached for the microphone. The microphone crackled slightly as Derek adjusted it, clearing his throat. The sound sliced through the background music and the clink of silverware, drawing eyes toward the head table. He smiled, a practiced one, the kind grooms wear when everyone is watching. Then he looked down briefly at his glass, then up again, this time scanning the room with a quiet purpose. "I know this is usually the part where the groom thanks everyone," he began, voice steady but low. "The friends who flew in, the family who helped with everything." A few people chuckled politely. He nodded, acknowledging them, but didn't laugh. "And I do thank you. I really do. But I'd like to say something else, too." He paused. Claire tilted her head toward him, still smiling, but I could see a flicker of confusion cross her face. "There's someone here," Derek said slowly, who wasn't sure she was even invited. Now people shifted. A murmur of curiosity ran through the room. I froze. He didn't say my name. But he didn't have to. She's someone who doesn't take up space even when she should, who shows up anyway even when no one opens the door. The air turned still. Claire's smile faltered. Mom stared down at her plate. And earlier Derek continued, "She left a gift. A quiet one. But it's not the gift itself I want to talk about." I felt every eye near me begin to tilt in my direction like slow-falling dominoes. It reminded me, he said softer now, that kindness doesn't have to be loud to be powerful. He placed the mic back into its stand with a soft click. No applause, just silence. I didn't move. I didn't smile. I didn't even breathe for a second. But inside something unclenched, not because he praised me, but because for once someone saw the version of me I had been carrying all along. He stepped down from the platform. Claire said something to him, I couldn't hear what. She didn't look pleased. A waiter passed in front of me. I stepped aside, letting him through. Then I reached into my purse and quietly pulled out my coat. No one stopped me. No one needed to. As I walked toward the door, I passed the gift table again. My little package still sat there unopened but no longer invisible. I stepped out into the evening air. It was cool, gentle. The kind of breeze that carried things away not violently, but with grace. And I walked home, alone, but not unseen. The rehearsal dinner was held the night before the wedding inside a rustic-style banquet hall that Claire insisted gave off elegant farmhouse vibes. White fairy lights dangled from every wooden beam, flickering like fireflies trapped under a roof. Long communal tables were lined with eucalyptus garlands and pale linen runners. The whole room glowed warm, curated like a Pinterest board come to life. I arrived 5 minutes early. That was my habit, not too early to seem desperate, not too late to be rude. When I walked in, no one noticed. Claire stood at the center of the room, radiant in a white silk dress that hugged her frame perfectly. She was mid-laugh, surrounded by bridesmaids sipping wine from personalized glasses with Bride Tribe etched in cursive gold. Mom stood beside her, arms crossed and glowing with pride, looking at Claire the way I used to dream she'd look at me. I made my way toward them, clutching a small wrapped package I had picked up earlier that day, a vintage book of poems Claire once adored when we were teenagers. I'd found it in a little secondhand store downtown, its pages still holding the scent of someone else's past. Before I reached the group, Claire turned to me and smiled, but it wasn't her real smile. It was the one she used for co-workers she didn't like or strangers in the elevator. Polite, hollow. "You came," she said. "How thoughtful." I nodded. "Of course, it's your big weekend." I handed her the gift. She took it but didn't unwrap it, just passed it to a bridesmaid who set it somewhere behind a drink tray without looking. Claire turned back to her friends almost instantly, mid-sentence again, like I had been a mild interruption to a more important conversation. I stood there for a beat too long. No one filled the silence. Then Mom approached. She had on her favorite pearl earrings, the ones she never wore unless she wanted to impress someone. "I thought you said you might not make it," she said, not quite smiling. "I changed my mind." She gave a small shrug. "Well, just don't linger near the cake table, all right? We have the photographer doing candids." It was meant to sound like a joke, but it didn't land that way. I nodded again, this time without a word. Dinner was buffet style. I waited until most people had taken their plates before I joined the line. The woman ahead of me, an aunt I barely knew, glanced over her shoulder and offered a smile I couldn't quite read. "Long time, Emily," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "Too long. Claire said you moved around a lot. Hard to keep track of you." I didn't answer. Just spooned some roasted vegetables onto my plate and stepped aside. I took a seat near the back at one of the tables that hadn't been decorated with name cards. I didn't mind. From there I could see everything. Claire's laughter rang out often. Derek, ever the composed groom, made his rounds, checking in on guests and thanking the caterers. He waved at me once from across the room. I offered a soft wave back. Halfway through the meal, one of the bridesmaids stood to give a toast. She shared a story from college, something about Claire organizing a sorority gala with ruthless perfection. Everyone laughed, clinked glasses. Then it was Mom's turn. She stood slowly, gently setting down her wine glass with care. She looked around the room like it was hers. "I just want to say how proud I am of my daughter," she began. "Claire has always been the one to take charge, the one with vision, with grace. She's been a light in our lives." She paused for effect, then added, Even when others drifted, she stayed steady. It wasn't a direct jab, but everyone knew I was the one who drifted. Claire looked down at her plate, hiding a smile. A few guests nodded politely, unsure whether to clap. I stayed silent, fork still in hand, not moving. The rest of the night passed in a blur. People mingled, dessert was served, someone spilled wine on a table runner and laughed too loud. But I stayed in my spot, watching, listening, collecting every little exclusion like petals pressed into a book. By the time I stood to leave, most guests had already begun saying goodbyes. Claire didn't notice me slip out. Mom didn't call after me. But as I reached the exit, I heard Derek's voice behind me. "Emily." I turned. He was alone, tie slightly loosened, eyes clear. "Thanks for coming," he said. I gave a half smile. "Of course." Then he glanced toward the gift table. "That was from you," I nodded. He looked at me a second longer than necessary, not in judgment, not in pity, just seeing me. And for that moment it was enough. The next morning was the wedding day. The sun poured into my hotel room through white gauzy curtains, warm and soft. I sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, staring at the dress I had laid out the night before. A muted navy blue midi, simple, respectful, not too bold, not too quiet, like I'd rehearsed being neutral. I arrived at the venue half an hour before the ceremony was scheduled to begin. Guests were already gathering outside the garden where the vows would be exchanged. The setting was picturesque, white folding chairs, aligned in rows, a delicate arch of peonies and ivy, soft instrumental music, playing from hidden speakers. Everything was perfect, or rather, Claire perfect. At the welcome table, I gave my name. The young woman in charge checked her list, then looked up puzzled. "Emily. There's no seat assigned under that name." My lips parted slightly, but I didn't argue. Just pulled out the small cream envelope I had brought, the one that held the gift card I'd tucked inside the book of poems in case she hadn't opened it last night. "I'm the bride's sister," I said gently. "Oh," the woman straightened. "You can just hang out near the side entrance until seating starts. They may call your name once all VIPs are in." VIPs. That word lingered. I nodded and stepped aside. For the next 20 minutes, I stood under the shade of a nearby tree, holding my small clutch with both hands. Other guests streamed in, friends in floral dresses, cousins I hadn't seen in years, co-workers and college friends of Derek's. They walked past me with smiles, nods, sometimes a polite wave. No one stopped. I spotted Mom walking toward the archway, arm in arm with Claire. Claire looked like a dream, ivory lace hair swept in a low chignon veil, cascading down her back like smoke. The photographer clicked away. Mom saw me, didn't stop either. Her lips moved quickly in Claire's ear. Claire didn't turn. A few more guests passed. One woman smiled apologetically. "They told you to wait out here too." I shook my head. "Just waiting to be seated." She blinked, confused. Then her name was called and she walked away. Eventually, everyone else had taken their seats. I stayed. A groomsman emerged from the side door, headset in his ear. "Are you Emily?" "Yes." "Sorry about the delay. Looks like your seat's in the back row. Just through there." He gestured toward the far end of the aisle. I thanked him quietly and made my way past the guests. As I walked, I saw them watching, not rudely, just aware. Back row. Always the back row. I took my place in the last seat of the farthest aisle. From here, I could still see the ceremony, but I was nowhere near the family rows. No one around me wore matching dresses or corsages, just the people who didn't quite fit. When the ceremony began, the music shifted. Claire appeared at the top of the aisle, and everyone stood. Her train swept behind her like royalty. Her eyes locked on Derek, who stood waiting in a charcoal suit, hands folded neatly. I watched as she passed the rows of friends, extended family, and finally the front row where Mom dabbed her eyes with a monogrammed tissue. Then Claire and Derek joined hands. The officiant began. Everything blurred together in a soft haze of perfect vows, gentle smiles, and a light breeze that carried the scent of lavender and fresh grass. Until it didn't. Until the part where they exchanged personal vows. Claire went first. She spoke beautifully, as always. Her voice was clear, every word rehearsed. "I've always been the planner," she said, smiling at the guests, "the one who kept things in order even when life was messy. I guess I get that from my mom." There were chuckles. She turned back to Derek. But meeting you taught me that life isn't about controlling every moment. Sometimes it's about letting someone else hold the map. Guests smiled. Some dabbed their eyes. Then it was Derek's turn. He took out a folded sheet of paper from his jacket, cleared his throat, and froze. His eyes scanned the crowd slowly. Then they landed on me. A long pause. You could hear the wind through the leaves. Before I say my vows, Derek began, I need to acknowledge someone. He looked back down, then up again directly at me. There's a person here who reminded me what quiet strength looks like, who taught me that showing up even when you're not invited in takes more courage than anyone clapping in the front row. The room held its breath. Even Claire tilted slightly unsure. He didn't say my name, but he didn't need to. Everyone turned. I felt every gaze, every question, every realization. Then Derek looked at Claire. And I know that the kind of love I want is the kind that doesn't forget people just because they don't stand in the spotlight. He folded the paper, looked at the officiant. I'm ready now. No one clapped, no one moved. I sat still, hands clasped. But inside, something shifted. The ceremony ended, but the silence lingered. People clapped, eventually soft and unsure, like they weren't sure if what just happened had been part of the plan. Claire smiled tightly as the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, but I noticed her hands gripping the bouquet just a little too hard, her knuckles paling beneath the lace gloves. They walked back down the aisle together, but Derek didn't look at her. Not once. Instead, he gave a brief nod toward my brow. A subtle acknowledgement, almost imperceptible. But I caught it. I stayed seated until most guests had stood to follow the couple into the reception area. Then I rose slowly, smoothed the front of my dress, and walked the long stretch alone. The reception was held in the adjacent hall, a space transformed into a floral wonderland with gold accents, soft pink lighting, and a grand chandelier hanging above. Place cards marked every table. I scanned them until I found mine, table 19. Near the back again, but this time with a better view, Claire and Derek entered to applause. The DJ welcomed everyone, encouraging guests to raise their glasses. Dinner was served. I barely touched my plate. Instead, I watched. Mom moved between tables, effortlessly praising Claire to relatives who beamed and nodded. Claire, meanwhile, seemed stiff. She smiled at the right moments, but her energy was pulled tight like a wire. Then came the speeches. First up, the maid of honor, Claire's best friend since college. She toasted their friendship, their wine nights, their late-night pep talks. Laughter bubbled around the room. Then it was the mother of the bride. Mom walked up with confidence, her champagne flute in hand. Claire has always been our light. She began, her voice warm. She was born with purpose, with grace. And today she's marrying a man who recognizes her worth. Not everyone finds that. A pause. She looked around, eyes grazing over me for a half second. But I always told her, Mom continued, that not everyone needs to be center stage to play a part. Some people support from the wings. Polite laughter. I didn't smile, I just took a sip of water. And so today, Mom concluded, we celebrate Claire, the one who always knew her path. Applause. I clapped too. Softly. The kind of clap you give when you're not sure whether it's for the speaker or for surviving the moment. Dessert came. Then, the first dance. Claire and Derek moved to the center of the floor, swaying to a soft jazz tune. It was choreographed, elegant, but there was a stiffness to it, his steps precise, her smile not quite reaching her eyes. When the music ended, guests clapped again, but not as loudly. Then the floor opened to everyone. I stayed seated until Derek made his way to my table. He didn't say anything at first, just stood across from me, holding 2 glasses of water. He placed one in front of me. You okay? He asked, voice low. I nodded. You didn't have to say anything earlier. I know, he said, but I meant it. Silence stretched between us. He looked down, then added, She never even opened your gift. I found it this morning. That surprised me. She said it looked like a journal and didn't want to start the day on a sentimental note. He paused, but I read the first few pages. The poetry? It was beautiful. I said nothing, just folded my hands. He took a breath. She doesn't know how to see you. I don't need her to, I replied quietly. He nodded like he understood. Then he looked at me differently. Not with pity, but with respect. Thank you for coming, he said. Before I could respond, the DJ called everyone for the cake cutting. He gave a small wave and returned to the front of the room. I watched as Claire took the knife in hand, smiling wide for the camera. Derek stood beside her, going through the motions. The frosting smeared, the guests clapped. But the air had shifted. I stood slowly, leaving my half-empty plate behind. As I made my way toward the exit, I passed a group of guests, whispering in low tones. Did you see how he looked at her during the vows? Not the bride, her sister. She's the one who gave him the book right. I didn't stop walking. But I felt the shift. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just clear. They had started to see me. Finally. I didn't plan to stay much longer. The air had thinned, and the ballroom, once dazzling with rose gold decor and curated smiles, now felt like a stage after the curtain fell. People were still mingling drinks and hand laughter floating from corners of the room, but something beneath the surface had shifted. I could feel it in how they looked at me now, longer, quieter, with eyes that held questions instead of dismissal. I walked to the coat check, passing the photo booth where guests had once lined up eagerly. It now stood empty, gold props scattered on the bench. I picked up my coat, slipping it on, slowly savoring the final quiet before the cold air outside would take over. But just as I reached the door, I heard my name. Emily. I turned. Claire stood a few feet away alone. Her veil was off, now pinned beside her curls, and her lipstick had faded to a soft pink. She didn't look angry, just exhausted. I didn't expect you to leave without saying goodbye, she said, voice carefully neutral. I met her eyes. I wasn't sure you'd notice. She flinched just slightly. Look, I know things didn't go the way you probably hoped. No, I replied calmly. They went exactly as I expected. She crossed her arms, hugging herself against the chill creeping through the open doorway. You've always made me feel like I'm the villain. I never said that. You didn't have to, she said quietly. It's the way you look at me, like you're always waiting for what? For me to mess up, for people to see that I don't deserve all this. I let the silence stretch. Then finally I spoke. I didn't bring that gift to prove anything, Claire. It wasn't for you to open in front of people. It wasn't meant to say you're wrong or I'm right. It was just something real. From me. That's all. Her expression shifted, something softening, something cracking. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. From across the room, I caught movement, Derek watching from a distance. He didn't interrupt. He just stood there, hands in pockets, waiting. Claire noticed. She glanced toward him, then back at me. He read the book. I know. He said it reminded him of how we first met, how he felt when we were still honest with each other. I didn't respond. Claire looked down. It's strange. Today was supposed to be perfect. I waited. It still looked perfect, didn't it? She asked, almost pleading. I didn't answer that. Instead, I stepped back slightly. I think we both got what we needed today, just not what we expected. Her shoulders dropped. No big outburst, no apology, just quiet defeat, one that didn't need my approval or forgiveness. And that was enough. I turned, placing my hand on the door. She didn't stop me. Outside, the night had settled. The sky above the venue glowed faintly with the lights from the hall, but the rest of the street was quiet. I walked down the steps, slowly, heels echoing against the concrete, the chill brushing my cheeks. At the bottom of the steps, I paused. From behind me, a camera shutter clicked. I turned. A young cousin, Sam, maybe 10 years old, was holding his mom's phone. You look like a queen coming out, he said, grinning. I smiled, crouched slightly, and ruffled his hair. Tell your mom thank you, I said. He nodded and ran back inside. I walked to my car. When I opened the door, a message pinged on my phone. Unknown number. Thank you. For what you gave me, for seeing me. I didn't need a name. I closed the car door gently. The music from the ballroom had faded. My hands were steady on the wheel, and for the first time in years, I wasn't looking in the rearview mirror. I sat in the driver's seat for a moment before starting the car. My hands rested quietly on the steering wheel, eyes lingering on the glow of the wedding hall in the distance. Inside that building, Claire was still surrounded by the applause and curated elegance of her big day. But out here under the night sky, I had found something quieter and more honest. I didn't rush to drive away. Instead, I reached into my purse and pulled out the card I had written. It was supposed to be placed with the gift earlier, but in the chaos it had never left my bag. The envelope was pale ivory, my handwriting small and steady across the front to Claire. I ran my finger along the sealed edge and considered whether to go back and hand it to her, but I didn't need to. The words inside were already lived. I left it on the passenger seat and finally turned the key. As I drove off, headlights carving through the quiet neighborhood, the silence inside the car was comforting. Not empty, just full in a different way. The next morning, I awoke to find my phone flooded with unread messages. Some were from numbers I didn't recognize, distant relatives, acquaintances, even a few who hadn't said a word to me at the wedding. One message stood out. It was from Derek. "They played your song after you left." She sat down, didn't speak for a long while. I stared at it, unsure how to respond. Then I noticed the second message sent just a few minutes later. "You didn't need a microphone. You were heard anyway." I put the phone down and stepped outside to my porch, the morning air crisp. I wrapped my robe tighter and sat with a cup of tea, letting the sun rise slowly. A few days later, a parcel arrived at my door. It was the gift I had brought to the wedding returned. But when I opened the lid, something was different. Inside, atop the neatly packed contents, was a note on familiar stationery. Claire's handwriting, neat, still careful. I couldn't open it that day, but I've read every word now. And I cried, not because it hurt, but because you saw me, really saw me. "I'm sorry I didn't do the same for you sooner." I folded the note and held it between my hands. My breath caught not from anger, not even from vindication, just a quiet ache, like something old had finally stopped bruising. I didn't write back, not yet. Instead, I took the book from the box, the handmade one I had crafted for her, and placed it gently on my bookshelf between two worn novels that had held me through harder times. That evening, while clearing out a drawer in the hallway, I found a photo from years ago. Claire and I, both in high school, sitting side by side at a family picnic. She was laughing. I was looking off to the side, a bit out of frame, but smiling too, that kind of smile you don't know you're making. I framed it and placed it on my entryway table. Not as a tribute to what was, but as a quiet marker of what had shifted. Not everything had healed, but something had moved. Something had finally been heard, not shouted, not demanded, just known. That night, as I locked up, I stood for a moment in the doorway. The wind had picked up slightly, rustling the leaves outside. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. And maybe that's the point. A week passed. I didn't hear from Claire again, and that was okay. The silence wasn't heavy. It was respectful, maybe even healing. I wasn't waiting for another apology or explanation. There's a quiet power in knowing that you were seen, even if just for a moment. That was enough. At the grocery store, I ran into Aunt Marlene. She hesitated before approaching me, her cart half full, her eyes flickering with something close to guilt. "I heard about the gift," she said softly, adjusting her scarf like it could hide her discomfort. I smiled gently. It wasn't meant to make a scene. She shook her head. "It didn't. But it made people think." I nodded and stepped aside so she could pass. As she did, she paused and added, "Your mother's been quiet since." I didn't ask for more. Back home, I found myself cleaning my apartment more deliberately, not to distract myself, but to make space emotionally, mentally. I donated a box of old decorations, some family mementos I no longer felt obligated to keep. It wasn't out of bitterness, just clarity. That Saturday, I attended a small community event at the local park, a crafts fair. I wandered through the booths, stopping at one where a woman was hand-binding journals similar to the one I had made for Claire. We talked for a while, mostly about technique and paper textures. Before I left, she handed me a blank journal with a soft leather cover. "You seem like someone with stories," she said. I thanked her, surprised at how kind it felt to receive something with no strings, no expectations. Later that night, I began writing, not about the wedding, not even about Claire, just thoughts scattered unfinished. But as the pen moved across the page, I realized how much I had kept quiet over the years. It wasn't just about being excluded that day. It was about all the times I'd let people speak over me, define me, write my story for me. Not anymore. The final entry that night ended with a single line: being seen doesn't require permission. A few days later, I received a text from Derek. No words, just a photo. It was Claire sitting on a bench outside a bookstore flipping through a copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. Her face was softer than I remembered. There was no performance in her expression, just stillness. I stared at the photo longer than I meant to. Then I set the phone down. There was nothing I needed to reply. At Thanksgiving, weeks after the wedding, I received an invitation. Not just a forwarded group message, a handwritten card. From Claire. Would love to have you. No expectations, just you. I didn't decide right away. When the day came, I stood in my hallway, coat in hand, staring at my front door. I didn't go. Instead, I lit a candle by the window, made myself a warm plate of food, and turned on the radio to an old jazz station. Halfway through dinner, my phone buzzed. Photo message. The family around the table with one empty chair. No caption. No pressure. I smiled, folded my napkin, and leaned back. Sometimes a chair left empty speaks louder than applause. Sometimes walking away with grace is the loudest thing you can do. And sometimes when they finally look up, really look, they don't see a victim or a forgotten guest. They see the quiet strength that never needed to be invited in. I finished my meal, washed the dishes, and turned off the lights. Behind me, the candle flickered, and in that gentle glow, I felt it again. I hadn't been erased. I had simply stepped out of the frame they drew for me and drawn my own. There's a kind of victory that doesn't come with applause. It walks in quietly, takes its place without asking, and lets the silence do the talking. Not everyone sees it. Not right away. But for those who've waited in the hallway, smiled through the ache, and carried their worth in both hands when it finally arrives, it doesn't need to announce itself. It's already home.